We'll call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order. This is the December 6, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting. A statement in compliance with the Open Meeting Acts. A current copy of the act is available at this meeting. Madam Clerk, can you take roll, please?
Augustine Schulte.
Here.
Barr.
Here.
Hemer.
Here.
Jablonski.
Here.
Kreshaw.
Here.
Lohr. Roth.
Here.
Schilling.
Here.
Council President Augustine Schulte, the roll has been called.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda tonight is the redistricting, voting, and the map boundaries. Mrs. Vasicek, would you like to
Yes.
to us on this, please?
Yes. So I wrote a memo kind of detailing that after every decennial census, we go through the redistricting at all levels of government, really. So the state finished theirs, which then moves on to the county and they do their precincts. And then it comes to the city, and we got that information on November 1st. This year is much accelerated compared to a typical year because of COVID-19 and the delay that put on gathering the data for the census. So November 1st, we got the information, and by December 30th, we have to get the ward information, the boundaries of the wards, back to the county election commissioner. The state legislature did pass a legislative bill saying that because of the delays this time around, that we don't have to read the ordinance 3 times, because as you can tell just from the lack of time, that would have been nearly impossible to do. So we have the ordinance on tonight for first reading, and then we will have it on at the next meeting for second reading, but we'll suspend the rules and pass it at the next meeting. So if there's anything earth-shattering tonight, we do have some time to look at those things, but we believe what is presented is it's our best options. So I attached a map, if you clicked through in your memo, and that map has a good overview of what you want to share my screen, and I'll just...
Oh, sure, yours okay.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, the map shows, is there something I need to click? Usually it just turns right on. I hate for you to have to skim back and forth. Try it again.
Oh, there.
Okay. So this, what I have up currently, is the existing precincts. And then I'll just turn on the proposed precincts. So the colors aren't exactly the same, but you can see both of them, both layers are on here. They're substantially similar. The biggest change is in that precinct where we annexed Country Club Shores back in 2018, and then just the growth in the northeast and the northwest. That's where the most substantial changes took place. So I'm going to turn off the precincts and then turn on the wards. So this is existing 4 wards. And here are the proposed 4 wards. So again, you can see basically where we've annexed and where the growth has taken place. Very, very minor boundary changes on the south side, really, of the highway. The majority of the changes are in 3 and 4, wards 3 and 4. Again, and I outlined it in the memo, but precincts are established first by the county, and then we have to establish wards, and wards are, whenever possible, supposed to follow precinct lines. And at the very worst case scenario, a ward should not be in more than 2 precincts. Okay, so there are some parameters, and population distribution has to be as even as possible across wards. So same rules for precincts, so which is why we generally follow the same boundaries. I got a couple of questions before tonight, which I think we answered, and that was just really related to why the lines were where they were, and the answer was that that's where the precinct lines were drawn. So we followed those lines because there was no reason not to follow those lines. Are there any questions? Connie Seaborn, the Platte County Election Commissioner, is here. So if you have any questions for Connie, she can come up as well. But do you have any questions for me? Brent?
Yes, did the election commissioner talk with the city at all about where the precinct lines were drawn? Was there any input from the
Before
city?
November 1st?
Excuse me?
Before we got it on November 1st?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge, no. The county worked with a GIS provider, a consultant, to help them establish their precinct lines. Connie, do you have anything to add?
And then we just got information from Brian at your guys' department up there, that handles all your map drawing. He gave us information, and I submitted that to the G-Works consultant guys, and they created the maps for us, and now we're just here finishing up the technicalities of drawing these maps with you guys.
How even are the various precincts within?
They're pretty well even. I know we had to make an adjustment on the one precinct that we had because it had gotten smaller in population, so we kind of consolidated that one. That was the old 1C, because being combined with 1B now, because the population growth there has shrank in the 1C, and then our 1D population, that precinct is going to become 1C on the new precincts once we get that all divided. So we're just losing one little precinct here in the city of Columbus as far as population wise that way.
One of the things that I noticed was, or typically in the past, Columbus has been divided into 4 wards, generally northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast. We got off that track with moving a portion of Ward 1 up into what would have been Ward 4,
Okay.
that far right-hand.
That red
Corner.
part there, yeah. Oops.
And I was wondering if there was, and likewise, there's another incursion in Ward 4, the industrial area, the county area.
Okay.
And I was wondering, why was that moved from Ward 4 to Ward 1? Makes no sense to me.
No sense for the industrial part of it because they don't vote anyway in the
That,
industrial.
that's my point,
Yeah,
is why move it if there's no
Okay.
reason to move it?
So do you guys want that little red area over there to the east? You want that included in with the Ward 4 then? Is that what you're wanting
Well,
to do?
I'm asking why.
You know, I didn't draw all the specific details of this map, you know, because this is all new to me being first time election commissioner. So we had the vendor do it, but I sure can ask and we can sure make the fixes for you.
Well, it's,
You know, I can ask the question about the
ask the
population.
question. And likewise, there's another area that I was concerned about, and that's the area between wards or precinct. Oh, let me get my thingy bob here. It's been between, it's up on 33rd Avenue between precinct 3C and 3B. There are 2 little areas over on the east side of 33rd Avenue. And they are included in 3C. And neither of those areas has any voters, or at least I don't imagine there
Talking
are any
about that
voters
area
in
right
them.
from there.
And I'm wondering why did we cross 33rd Avenue? Why didn't we just have a nice straight line there?
Second to load here, but he's
I-
talking about right.
I guess I'm going back to, did anybody look at this and apply some common sense to some of these things?
So you're wanting 33rd Avenue all the way up being a straight line, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There may be some good reason to do it, and I don't
Yeah.
I don't understand why this was done like it was done.
Talking about
and-
precincts though. This parcel.
Because there are no votors in them, guess it really doesn't make a lot of difference.
Talking about that.
Yeah.
Is that to the 29th
Had to do it for
Avenue
population.
or up there?
This is
Projected
precinct
pro-
3B.
I mean, if there's no one in there.
Because I know we moved some of that for one supervisor,
So-
because two of them live in the
Mr.
same
Roth,
area.
why does that concern you, though?
Oh,
I mean, that it's not straight,
Well, it
And
concerns me,
there was original lines going up through some of that area, because two of the supervisors lived in that one area up there. And when they drew the line, it went through about 4 houses, so houses were being split.
I'm not sure that we're talking the same
Maybe you're not
areas
talking the
now.
same area, but I know it's up in that area, but
We can maybe discuss this later, but
Well, I guess I would say what Beth's probably trying to say is that they're still both part of Ward 3.
yes, they certainly are, but they're not in the same precinct. And
Correct.
when it comes time to have voters go to their voting places, you've got, it just doesn't make any sense
Talking about
to me.
this line following 33rd. But then this one's gonna be detached, cause there's no city limits.
yeah, that's
know,
the reason too.
The
is because-
the one north of the parkway,
Yes,
it wouldn't be attached to 3B because there's no city limits.
Yeah, no, I
The lines
understand
have to
that,
be
but-
touching, the areas have to be touching up there.
yeah.
So maybe the one, that would be like,
I'd probably back this one here
off
too. They could put,
campus.
But I don't know, does it need to be attached?
Yes, precincts have, she just said precincts have to be
yes, the
connected.
group of peoples have to be connected in the area,
The physical boundary has to be connected.
So be it.
but we could probably make this one down here with that green, that
This one.
purple, could be changed to the 3B precinct there.
This is, I understand, we got 2 precincts that close together.
I can get them to see if they can adjust the maps for us, so. And that.
We will follow up on that. Any other questions?
I'm sure it has a lot to do with population.
Be approved.
Next meeting.
With
And we would have
just
to
the one
amend
reading?
the legal descriptions for those. And, well, it would only affect your precincts actually, but it's gonna,
I guess my overall concern is that there was no dialogue between the city and the election commission in how the precincts were drawn.
And that's probably because we hired an outside vendor for the first time, and they handled everything with maps being presented to them, and.
See,
that's
they know
completely-
nothing about Columbus.
No, they don't know nothing about
And they,
Columbus.
yeah.
see my
this-
frustration here? We're not talking to one
I
another.
understand that part of
Alright.
it.
Thank you.
I will say that the state continually encouraged, I know they constantly encouraged all the 93 counties across Nebraska to contract with a consultant because of the accelerated timeline. So they didn't have the time to communicate like maybe we have in the past. So I will say that, which is the
'Cause
first time in
normally-
Platte County, which is the first time in probably more than 50% of the counties in
And
Nebraska.
normally, it's the first part of March, you start getting the information for the census and starting this whole
Understand.
process.
Understand.
But we got cut short, and nobody's gonna stop the elections from coming on time in May, so.
Now,
We
you
gotta
said,
play catch-up here in Platte County as far as.
you said a minute ago that the precincts had to be adjoining one another, is that
Well,
correct?
the residents in that area have to be all touching, simultaneously.
Well,
I
take a
don't know.
look at the blue area down here
Doesn't
in,
matter.
What he's gonna say about that was.
it looks like there's some areas there that aren't touching.
Yeah, this one, I guess there's a break there. But
And that's probably Egg Park through there, huh?
no, that's the county industrial site. Yeah.
I'd leave it to
This
you.
is Ag Park, this is the
Okay.
county.
Oh, yeah,
the
that'd
county.
be BD and Egg Park there. So that's everything north of the thing up there.
Right, so, but in order for this to be part of our ward,
Right in
this
there.
in Ward
Ag
North,
Parks.
it would have to
That's all
become part
county
of
stuff,
precinct
yeah.
D, 4D,
But
in order for us to.
the
amend
precinct
the
doesn't adjoin.
Yeah, you got
I don't
it.
know. The map that was in the packet showed nice, what I assume are polling places.
Let me pull it up here.
It had little houses with what I assume are notations for
That's what's
polling
in our-
places.
Yeah, that one is, yep.
But I can't tell, I'm a 4C precinct guy, but I can't tell where my polling place is from that map.
4C.
Oh, 4C.
Did it just not get on there?
Your vote doesn't count.
You can see.
I can't tell where it is from the
Or
map.
C
I
would
know
be
where
at
my
the
polling place
administration
is,
building.
yes.
No,
Is it at the, I
it's
don't,
because it's not in 4C. It's in 4, the next one to the west.
I've gotten off on a tirade here and let us move on to other things.
It's in 4B is
It
where
was
it's at.
Marine Church, but that's.
It would be really nice if the map showed
Right place. Here, and I vote there. That's right.
polling places for your
don't you
particular
send out
ward.
postcards to
We do
everybody?
send postcards out, and I will make sure we note that the map shows more clearly.
If you highlight over at Cottonwood Place, it tells you it's 4C.
The Cottonwood place ain't a polling place anymore because of COVID. Because we ended up polling it to East Lutheran Church is where they ended up being. So that's gonna be 4C's polling place,
Okay.
so. That's another problem we have with the nursing homes being involved with the elections and COVID now, thanks to that.
Sure,
They
they
won't
don't
let
wanna
us back
open up the
in.
doors, sure.
And see, in Brookstone will be another one that will have to be changed probably to the high school once we get their approval too. But the rest all stay, so.
I'm not asking that you move anything. I'm just
Asking the questions, which is good to ask.
asking questions and asking for more
More detail.
communication between our entities such that we get things right. Thank you.
All right, anything else? Okay, thank you.
Council President, I would move to recommend to the mayor and city council that the redistricting be approved as presented.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. And all in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, nay. I guess I should have asked if there was any discussion, sorry.
Voted aye.
Motion passes. That moves us on to the next item, presentation by RDG Planning and Design on our housing study.
Amy Haase with RDG Planning and Design is here tonight to give you a presentation of this housing study update. I'll let Amy come up and go ahead and do that. If you have questions, you can ask, I'm sure, while she's presenting or at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Again, Amy Haase from RDG Planning and Design. Pleasure to be here with you tonight. Hello.
Is the presentation that you're making here the same as was delivered in our packet?
You got the whole thing. She's
Yeah.
giving
Yes.
an abbreviated presentation of what you got.
All right, but it is the same.
Yes,
Same material.
same material. Maybe
All
a
the,
couple
all the
typos.
slides are the same.
Yes, maybe a
Alright.
couple typos corrected from what you got. But other than that, yes, it's the exact same, just a few things narrowed down, because if I went through all of that, I figured you'd boot me out of here. And you had other things to get, other agenda items to get to tonight. So I'll try to move through this as quickly as possible. It'll be a little bit of a fire hose, so my apologies. But again, if you do have any questions as I'm going through, do please ask, and then happy to answer any questions that you have at the end. We like to start these off. Maybe I should note a little bit of the process that we went through. So in my head, I always kind of break it down into 3 pieces, and 2 of them we're doing simultaneously. One of that is the market analysis. The other part is the public engagement. So the public engagement was a series over a couple days of listening sessions that we held in October, right? Yeah, that we held in October. So that just gave us a chance to talk with individuals on the ground, to really understand and combine that with the market analysis. As I often say, the numbers tell us one piece of the story, and having conversations with people in the community helps us see the whole picture of what's actually happening with housing. This was an update, so we were building off of some of that previous work and previous understanding. Exciting to see, and as I'm sure of all of you are aware, Columbus did see some great growth in the last 10 years. So the 2020, as you just heard a little bit in your previous presentation, the 2020 census has only come out with total population, some race and ethnicity information, and then on housing units, we know number of units and number of vacant units. So there will be a mixture of data that you will see in here, and we try to note that. When that 2020 information is being used, it will say 2020, but there were other times where we had to use 2019 estimates, because that's what is the census has available right now. But this is interesting. You can see you grew as strong as many of your counterparts, more along the I-80 corridor counterparts. Yes.
Go back a slide,
Yeah.
please. What are aspirational peer cities?
So we included Lincoln and Omaha, which aren't necessarily peer cities as in similar size communities, but they often get brought up in many of our stakeholder discussions about what's happening building wise and building activity, cost points, all of those things. So we felt that they were probably a community to include, and they were actually categorized and identified as that, as more, we'll usually maybe say more like aspirational cities when we're thinking especially about kind of that building activity level that you're maybe seeing in those. And that's a carryover actually from the previous study too. Thanks. Construction activity, as many of you are aware, it's been much more robust in the last few years than we'd seen in the previous 10 years before that. But what we were continuing to hear was that it still was not meeting the overall needs that we had, and that, as you can see, it was heavily dominated by kind of 2 product types for the most part in that time period. So continuing to need that variety in the housing market. You were growing at about a 1% annual growth rate. We felt that is what often I describe as a healthy growth rate. So that's a nice kind of moderate pace to be growing at. But what we will also see is that really addressing maybe some of our employer needs that they have right now. I mentioned that they did have total unit counts out. One of the things that was a big issue when with the previous study was our vacancy rate and our very low vacancy rate. And we have seen some odd numbers sometimes from the census on vacancy rate. I would actually say yours is probably getting to be a little bit more accurate. But it also is probably still a little bit on the low side. So we are saying we'd like to see you in the 5 to 6% range. That gives us some variety in the market, because it might even be a little bit lower than that when we really start thinking about units that are available. I mean, keep in mind when we talk about a vacancy rate, and a snowbird who leaves their home seasonally is considered a vacant unit. So those are things to keep in mind. That's not a unit that's going to be available to a new employer. Okay, if we're growing at about a 1% annual growth rate, that means that over the next 10 years, and we're pushing up that vacancy rate a little bit to provide some variety within the market and options for new individuals moving to the community, we're going to need to add about 1,200 units to the market, which would be about 141 units annually between now and 2030. I'd like to point out down kind of, it's in yellow, maybe it doesn't fully look like that on the screen there, but if we also have a very large number of current positions open, approximately 2,000. If we assumed that, say, a third of those are going to be filled by individuals who are living in the region, who already live here or live in adjoining communities and could fill those jobs, and a third might be from households that have 2 individuals working out of them. So we said, what if we just had to have another third filled by those households, new individuals, new households being formed in our community? That would tell us that we would need today, right now, 670 units to fill just a third of those 2,000 job openings that we have today. And I can tell you from our conversations, we do not have 670 units that are for sale, and we probably don't have that in for rent. And if you add those two numbers together, we probably don't have for sale and for rent there today. So yes, we do need things over time, but we also have this kind of pent up demand. So we like to say, you know, that 141 is probably on the conservative side because we need to continue to be addressing kind of the immediate pent up demand need that we also have. There's a couple different ways that we look at affordability. This is one of them, and that is looking at the value to income ratio. So we're looking at median value to median household income. We usually say that the 2.5 to 3 times a household's income is going to be in the affordable range. So that means they're paying less than 30% of their income on housing each month. When interest rates are as low as they are, that starts to push up closer to 3. And when interest rates go up a little bit, then we're probably more at the 2.5 range. So you're 2.42, which tells us, generally speaking, you're a fairly affordable market. I would like to point out, this is 2019 data. It does not take into consideration any of the maybe potential increases that we've been seeing in some of the sale prices. Now, that's also something I want to point out. There's a difference between the sale price to maybe what things are appraised at or assessed at too. So we have definitely been seeing some of those increases in sales. The other one is we're looking at median contract rent. It has gone up a little bit. It also gives you a chance here to compare to some of these other cities. You've had some new construction, which pushes up that rent level a little bit because obviously a new construction can start to demand those higher price points. But also keep in mind that once we start to get a market a little bit more imbalanced, then hopefully some of those older units can start to rebalance to what I will refer to as price points that are appropriate to their age and condition. When we think about those units over time, this is where a variety of housing products can be really important, and our conservation of products is going to be, or conservation of housing stock is really important. So we said if we looked at where our households are today, income range wise, and we said that stayed constant, what price points would we need housing in? So there's a couple things I like to point out here. We realize that probably building a new owner-occupied home for less than $200,000 is going to be very challenging to do. So here we're saying we need 348 units potentially in that range. So where do those units come from? Those units, a lot of them will come from preservation of our existing housing stock. We have those units within it. We just need to maintain those and make sure they stay in good condition and have options for people to move up to. It's also thinking about other product types that we might be able to bring in a little bit closer to that price point. So what did we hear? What were some of the major themes when we think about the market analysis and the listening sessions kind of combined together? We heard about builder capacity. Do we have the builders to, if we have the funding, which we do today, do we have the individuals to actually swing a hammer and build or repair the homes? Lot shortage, where do we build? If we if we have the capacity to do that, if we've got the funding and the resources and the builders to do it, where do we have the lots to build? A lack of housing variety, again, those options, and we especially heard that for individuals that might want to downsize or go to something that's lower maintenance. And that might be an individual in an existing home, or maybe a young professional who doesn't maybe want to necessarily live in a traditional multifamily rental property, but would like, but also doesn't want to take care of a lawn yet. You know, they'd rather be doing, you know, go to the lakes, as I describe it in a lot of places. Our for sale shortage was an existing problem a few years back when we were here, and that has only continued and become a national issue at this point. Downtown opportunities also we think is pretty exciting about what can we continue when we, and this ties closely to that third bullet point of adding variety to our market. Infill and redevelopment sites and rethinking how we think about those opportunities, expanding that a little bit more, and I'll talk about that here in the strategies in a second. We also have a very strong economy, which is exciting to see and should bring a lot of confidence to the potential that developers and investors should have here in the community. You've had good, strong growth. You have 2,000 job openings. There's the strong economy is there to support that. And there's clearly been this appetite for new products too. So we've seen that with the new construction that you've had with the new apartments. I think when we were here previously, we probably hadn't had any new apartments built in probably 20 plus years. And the units that have been built have filled quickly. Okay, so some directions forward. There's kind of 4 key objectives that we want to think about that we're going to tie back the strategies to that you'll see here. One of them is what we refer to as life cycle housing. So we have housing for every stage of life, from I'm new to the community, I'm a young person, I'm entering the housing market for the first time, to I'm raising a family now and we need a little bit more room to what we want to downsize. So every stage of life. We need to ensure that we have lots in a variety of locations and sizes. That's really important, and that ties back to making sure we have an opportunity for a variety of housing projects. We need to think strategically about rehabilitation and housing conservation. Our best source of affordable housing is the housing that we have here in our community today. And then finally, continuing to focus on downtown opportunities and those opportunities that we can think about both revitalizing and reinvesting in the district and expanding options within the housing realm. Talked a little bit about this already, but this is kind of that concept. And I always like to point out on this that there are those of us, including myself, that stopped at the starting house, that we didn't continue to move up. And there's a variety of reasons that individuals do that. And so just sometimes always just providing the move up housing isn't necessarily that. I've been in my house 20 years. It was our first home. We will probably skip the prospering point and go to a lifestyle choice will be our next. So people move around in this in different ways and choose to maybe stay in locations for a variety of different reasons. So I always like to kind of point that out. So on the housing diversity side, how do we continue to create options within the market, increase what I refer to sometimes as our mobility rate? So moving people being able to move around to a home that fits their current lifestyle and where they're at. So when I also talk about this, I like to kind of share what do we mean when we start talking about diverse housing options. So we're talking about things like townhomes and duplexes, multifamily structures, small lot, single family, accessory dwelling units, manufactured and modular housing, downtown units, all of those things we can think about, and tried to provide a few different examples of those options from small lot, single family. And I will point out that top right one actually have full garages. They're just off the back. Bottom right is actually in Lincoln. Those are cottage court development. So it's a small kind of shared green space in the center, but everybody has their own unit. To infill and redevelopment. If anybody knows where the bottom left one is, that's also here in Nebraska, but that's a site of a former Walmart site that was redeveloped with commercial and residential incorporated into it. So we need to continue to increase our number of rental units. So that was one thing we heard from a number of our stakeholders. How do we do that? We need to think about identifying potential suitable sites for that, maybe even doing advanced acquisition on those sites, developing partnerships, including with our businesses and institutions to help us recruit in those areas. A good example of this that I give sometimes is we worked with a region in Indiana, and they had a major employer that said, we'll provide the property. We have some extra land on our where we are in our facility here, and we're happy to provide the property. We don't want to manage it and run it and do all that, but that's our way of being in that partnership. And we had another example in here from Streck Bio here in Nebraska that's actually building their units that I'll talk about here in a second. We're going to have to continue to recruit developers who are interested in doing those types of projects, and then continue to encourage downtown housing opportunities. Mention this downtown housing piece. I think there's a couple things that we need to think about from our discussions with stakeholders from the downtown. We maybe need to assemble a little bit of a how-to guide to help people step through. As I often describe it, is there might be an individual who owns a building or runs, their insurance agent. I'll just give that as an example. And, what do they know about A, doing rehab projects, and B, maybe being a landlord? So a little bit of a how-to kit, a little bit of maybe forming partnerships for how to do that. One of the other things that we might want to think about is forming a business improvement district. We heard concerns about just maintenance, parking, all of those things. And that's something that a business improvement district can help kind of take on. And it's a model that we can look to many of your peer cities have already done. So it's not like you'd have to reinvent the wheel on something like that. In the last few years, Nebraska has extended its land bank legislation. So that might also be a possibility to look into for kind of getting control of potential lots around the city that offer some infill opportunities. When we also think about new lot development, there's a few things that I want to emphasize mostly is one of it is it doesn't always have to be kind of that green field going out to a site that used to be a cornfield, but let's think about our older commercial corridors. So I talked about the former Walmart site. Even before COVID, retail was changing, right? We were seeing a lot of our small box retailers, mid-box retailers that were already going out of business, and it's left some holes in a lot of communities. We need to see those as opportunities where we can mix in some residential and some commercial uses together. Where can we provide continued kind of medium and higher density opportunities? This, I'm going to go back here really quick because I love this top left example. That is a duplex in the middle of an older neighborhood that probably nobody in that neighborhood ever thinks about, right? It blends in perfectly with the rest of the neighborhood. So where do we have those opportunities to add those pieces in and blend that in? I talked about working with our employers, and then finally assembling some of those partnerships that thinking about it like our old industrial park groups that would come together to purchase land and share risk. We did it on the industrial park side. Can we think about that same sort of kind of approach when we think about housing? On the housing conservation side, again, this would be really important. I have to share, I think, so you guys should all be really proud of the purchase rehab resale program that we've seen here in Columbus. You are actually a case study that I share with a lot of other cities of how it gets done and how it gets done right. So we need to continue to support those efforts. It's a great program and really important. I think it'd be really interesting to think about how we can maybe combine that with a senior-oriented development project. So when we do a development that allows the senior an option, to move into, and hopefully they'd be able to sell their home into the program and kind of turns over those areas. Land bank also might be a piece to this that could be helpful, but keep in mind a lot of times the homes that will sometimes end up in a land bank can be in rougher condition than this program would always necessarily take on. A few of these things that I'm going to point out here are things you're already doing. So how do we just, but I like to emphasize that they remain important. So demolition programs, first and foremost, we should try to save every house that we possibly can. But as you guys all know, that's not always possible, right? So we need to make sure that we're continuing to fund those. And then once we have that lot, being able to find a way through something like a land bank to secure that lot so it doesn't just end up as somebody's garage. And that we're adding a home back into an area where we have water and sewer and a street already, and we don't have to figure out the funding to make that lot all new in some new location. The housing rehab programs are continuing to be really important. Can we potentially fund, add some additional funding beyond just, often those are funded through traditional CBDG funds, but basic repair and maintenance, we want to make sure we're avoiding Band-Aid projects though. We need to be improving the overall energy efficiency of homes too, so that's something we can work with our energy partners on. I always say it's not affordable if we're spending $400 a month in utility bill in February. It takes away some of the affordability sometimes on our homes. Thinking about rehab for both owner and renter occupied. A lot of communities are doing that a little bit more on the renter side, but obviously there's some strings usually attached to that, such as holding rent levels or having to pass inspection programs and so forth. Finally, on our, almost finally, I think I got one more after this, our workforce development. Needing somebody to swing that hammer. We would love to see Central Community College expand their programs here in Columbus. You know, they have programs, but I personally would make the argument that if you're doing the program in Columbus or in Grand Island, I can guarantee you that Grand Island is trying really hard to keep every one of those kids that are coming out of that program there in Grand Island because they have the same labor shortage. So can we develop that kind of program here in Columbus so we can maybe get them here in the community and hopefully then keep them here in the community? But also, how are we thinking about sponsorship of students? You know, this is something we've done around medicine and sponsorship of doctors, but I also just use the basic example of, my son's in a diesel program, and there's plenty of employers right now that are saying, we'll sponsor you through that, but you got to come work for us at the end of that. Succession planning. A lot of our building trades folks and skilled trades folks are seeing retirement come a little bit closer every year. What are we doing to make sure that their businesses stay active and alive and established within our community? And then finally, just encouraging our kids to go into the programs in the first place is really important. Finally, employer assistance, continuing to build those partnerships. I talked about this already a little bit, but there's a whole variety of ways that our employers are often interested in being a partner in this issue because more and more they're realizing that just covering moving costs doesn't do a lot if there's no home to move into when the individual gets here. And there's more and more interest in being a partner at the table on this and addressing their workforce needs. So happy to answer any questions. I know that's a little bit of a fire hose.
Council members, any questions?
One quick question. On page 38 of your original brochure, you talk about housing rehab programs are usually limited to funding through CDBG.
Community Development Block Grants.
Thank you.
Mr. Lohr?
Thank you very much. It was a good presentation. I didn't see as much emphasis on the cost of materials as I thought I would see. It seems to me like in my discussions with anybody and everybody that's in the building trades are just moaning and groaning about how much the cost of materials has gone up. Columbus has experienced that with their Highway 30 reconstruction project, just actually a kick in the rear. Mm-hmm. But I just didn't see that much in here about it. It just seems, now that goes back to your purchase, rehab, resell programs, and we've got the king of that in the state sitting right behind you to your right. And he has done this forever. We have been supportive. We in Columbus have been very supportive of that program, and it's done us a lot of good, and I think it could do a lot of good elsewhere, and that does reduce the cost of materials into what amounts to a brand-new house. But I was just surprised in your presentation you didn't spend more time on that.
Yeah, couple things. One is we've definitely seen some of those prices coming down a little bit. They're not back to where they were in 2019. If they come down more, I don't expect them to come down more for about another 6 months, just because of the backlog that I was hearing a year ago was 18 months. So that means we're at about another 6 months. That is all just part of my sense, and what we've been hearing is that it's part of how we're just going to have to figure out kind of sometimes the gap financing. So I think the purchase rehab resale program is actually a really good one, of just continuing to say what we could do with 30,000 5 years ago is a little different than what you can do with 30,000 today. Probably a fair. So do we now need 50,000? And, is that going to come, or do we have the ability to get that from our existing pools of funding? Or do we need to find some of that additional gap? I think probably part of the reason why it wasn't touched on here is you guys, and maybe it should have been kind of re-emphasized, you've been very successful at achieving some of the programs like the workforce housing programs through the state, which help fill some of that gap in the cost that we're seeing. But again, back to the issue of we have to have the builders to actually build the units in that program being one of the biggest challenges.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right, we don't need a motion on this item. Thank you for your presentation. It was excellent.
Thanks. Pleasure being here with you again.
Thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda then is a presentation on snow removal policy.
Good evening. I assume most of you looked at your pamphlets and you've seen it, but for those that are watching or viewing from home or will be viewing at a later date, I encourage you to go to the city website. All this information's on there. You just put in Columbus, Nebraska snow policy and it'll come right up. Just don't do Columbus because you'll end up in Ohio. It'll be confusing. But I have Clete Borchers here, City Street Superintendent, with me. If we have any questions that I can't answer, I'm sure he'll gladly help me out with them. So, next slide. So just the basic plowing policy. It explains our ice control, the timeline and when we try to go out and what we do. We try to have the snow removed within 12 to 24 hours of the event. Timing is a lot of it. If we get it early enough and it's done by 1 or 2 in the morning, then we'll go into the downtown area and try to get downtown cleaned up as soon as possible. That's not always the case with the timing. So, we just kind of base that on the time of the event. The next slide is just a basic question and answer. Explains our de-icing process. We have pre-treatment. We can use a anti-icing agent. We try to apply that if we're going to be getting freezing weather or an icing event prior to that. If we can't make it or it doesn't work out, then we go to the de-icing process, which will be just a little different mixture of spray and everything, and based on the temperature. So, there again, this is all in the on the website to review, and you can take some time and kind of read through it. When the plowing begins, typically we go out at a 2 to 6 inch event. Unless there's wind or really heavy winds, 2 inches could really make a mess. Then we would go out prior to that. So the guys monitor the weather and they're out checking the conditions constantly through the events, even prior to the storm. So they do watch that as well. The question comes up at times about what streets are plowed. The street division, we plow all the city streets within the corporate city limits, as well as the parkway. So, and then the highways through town, that's part of, we do that with we're through with the state of Nebraska. We work with them on that as well. Cul-de-sacs, they're a little harder to get. We can't get our big equipment in there. That's done with the loader. We've only got 3 or 4 loaders, so it takes us a little longer to get into the cul-de-sacs. We ask people not to park in the center because that's usually where we pile the snow. So that's always kind of been an issue. And then there's a question about cars. Should I move my car? Well, it'd be great if we get all the cars off the street through the process. We could probably do it in half the time, but we know that's not gonna happen. Some people don't have the advantage of off-street parking. So that's usually why we'll go out into the residential area. It works a little better if we can get there during the business working hours. Most of the vehicles are gone and then off the street, so we'll go through and do those. Then we'll follow up the following day, because once that windrow is created, they've got 12 hours to move it or remove that after that point. So then we'll go back around and make our second round and try to clean things up. Alleys are the last that we do, unless it's a commercial area or a business area. We'll clean them up, but typically that's one of the last things we get. So, but we got a lot of, refuse trucks, garbage collectors are going through. They're pretty well packing them down and stuff, so they're pretty well passable, because it takes quite a bit of snow to stop them trucks. So that kind of works and helps us out. Once again, I'll touch on the downtown business district. That's, like I said, that's all timing. If we get it and we can get down there, we'd like to get down there at 2 in the morning, as soon as the areas are cleared out, and do our best to get that done. We have some problems with, some of the business owners don't get there till later, so we gotta go back and clean up again. If it's a heavy snow, we'll windrow it and remove it the following night with snow blowers. Or if it's a workable snow, we'll just pile it and put it on the corners and try not to cause any problems that way. And just, it's more fiscal responsible. We do it that way instead of having to rent trucks to haul it and dispose of it that way. The snow emergency, we've kind of changed that policy a bit with, typically we had back, I guess I'm kind of jumping around, if you keep up, but
You go back?
no, go to the next one, the snow, I think next one, yeah, the snow emergencies. We've changed these. We went from basically 2 streets in the prior years. Now we've got 24 streets listed as emergency snow routes and 20 avenues, which we're constantly updating. We've had some questions from Print yesterday or today that, East 14th was so narrow, parking there wasn't an issue. Well, it shouldn't be now either, because it's got a center turn lane. They still shouldn't be parking there, but the signs might not get up, so we'll have to watch that, and we'll see what that is. But when we issue a snow emergency, they're either designated by the signage that's already out there, and we signed a lot of them. Some of them, the parkway, it's really not an issue out there because the snow mostly blows off, so we don't have to sign it. It's already signed, no parking, emergency stopping only. East 14th Avenue is the same way, but most inside the city, the business areas, the residential areas, that's where we have the problems with traffic and cars and stuff. So if we get a heavy snowfall, we will utilize this and, use those emergency routes. It just kind of gives us another tool in the toolbox to, we don't have to tag them. We can tow the cars immediately. If somebody leaves their car and abandons it or creates a problem, 38th Street, we have issues out there. The last snowstorm we had, I think 2019, and people got called out there stuck, so then some of these people thought it was a challenge to go out there and try to drive that road, and then we had all kinds of cars stuck there. We couldn't hardly get the emergency vehicles through there, and with the snowfall, we couldn't even get the tow trucks to come out after that for so long. So hopefully this setup will help us out with it. And then this one's just a notice of 24 hours after the snowfall to have your sidewalk scooped and the snowpack off. Then you can go to that next one. That's just our streets, the new ones that are, some of them are posted. Most of the ones in town are posted. Lost Creek Parkway, we didn't put any signage out there. East 14th Avenue, we're gonna kind of monitor that, see how that goes. That'll be on there, but if we do a snow emergency, this will be part of the notice, and this will come out online, and these will be listed out on our notice as we call out a snow emergency. You can go to the next one. We got an interactive map. You can kind of hover over this map. It's not a tracker map. We don't have that technology yet. We're looking into that if you want to track the plow. But this, you can kind of hover and it'll give you an address or a street where you're at. But that's basically what we have laid out, which typically will get you within a 4-block area of a plowed street in a major snow event. You should be able to get to that area if you have to. So that's the policy we come up with and how we laid that all out. And this is just a typical, a fire hydrant to, protect your neighbors, yourself, your home, your property. You got a hydrant on your corner, if we can dig it out and make a pass so the firefighters can find it and be able to get quicker access to it, that'll help for quicker response if it's needed. Hopefully we don't see 3.5, 4 foot of snow this year, but you never know. So I went over that really quick, but if there's any questions.
I do have one. So, I think just to clarify for the community too, if you have a resident who has a four-wheeler with a blade in the front, do they have permission to clear off their street before you come through, or their alley, or? I know there's some that they do, but it's my understanding they need to have
The
some
city
kind of.
policy and the code states that you're not allowed to put snow on the city street or in the right of way or pile it where it's an obstruction of a view or anything. So that is city code. They're not supposed to do it.
All right, so that, I was thinking that they needed to have some kind of a permit.
Well, you can,
Or-
they can use their four-wheelers if they're registered and everything to do snow removal on sidewalks and stuff. They
Okay.
are allowed to do that,
But not on the streets.
not to deposit on the city street.
Okay, or even to just clear off the city street? Like if they want to say, hey,
I could move snow in front of my house as long as I take it out of the right of way.
Right. And you don't deposit on the city
Right,
street.
if I'm cleaning my driveway, I can take it across, come in and take it into my yard, or take it in, as long as I don't
Correct.
deposit it in the right of way or in the street.
well, I'm just thinking of like one of, if,
Well, as
I
long
guess
as
I'm
he's not
thinking-
home, I will, and the wind's blowing, no.
I'm just thinking of like one of those streets where they're not one of the closer ones that you're first, you do the snow. So you have somebody who's in an area where they're not on a snow route, but they want their street cleaned, so they hop on their four-wheeler and go down the middle of their street, plow off the snows.
They want to assume the liability of doing it, that's up to them, but,
Okay, and I just didn't know if I was thinking at one time that there was some kind of a policy or an ordinance that individuals could not do that unless they had a permit to do that, I guess.
not on the streets. I think they can have a permit or they have a registered unit to be able to push the snow and have coverage to use their four-wheelers on their own property.
On their own, okay.
Right. But we're not, we don't have the manpower, the police department doesn't have the manpower to go around and, try to chase them down, because usually they're in and out of there before we even get around sometimes, so.
Sure.
Let me ask you the great question, always comes up. How come you put that snow back in my driveway when you plowed that street?
I just thought they were doing it to my own driveway, but you have that same problem? Yeah, we-
Have for years.
It's time consuming. We have nowhere else to go with it. On right of way, in the driveways, that's just the nature of the beast. We can't turn the plows because, we put it on the other side of the street. It'll be an issue for the other people's side of the street. So we just kind of split up. Everybody gets a little bit of it. So there's some tools out there, but in a city, residential area such as what we have here, it's not practical to have the blades that drop down on a county road, where you got 600 foot of yard, that works. So you got a 30-foot driveway. You can do that and pile it, but it's not practical in the city limits.
One other question, when you've cleared a residential area and cars that weren't moved are snowed in, how long do they have to move those?
I think they got 12 hours.
Okay.
And they will be tagged, so they will mark them. John?
Chuck, are your de-icing efforts largely glycol driven now, or are you still using salt?
No, we're still using beet juice. We don't use a whole lot of rock salt anymore in gravel. We make our own brine, and we're set up at that shop. They do that in-house now.
Beet juice, would you translate, please?
Well, beet juice, that's exactly what it is. It lowers the temperature. Yeah.
It is beet.
ADM has a byproduct as well.
Never did like
So-
those, so I'm
You
glad
can
to
drink
use
it
them
if
for
you don't
something
put it
else.
on. It's pretty good stuff.
That's for us to eat.
I think I'm gonna.
But that's part of the bonding agent that sticks it to the street, and
I see.
you can lower the temperature of the
But you're
icing.
using glycol as well as the
Right.
beet juice. Okay, thank you.
All right, if there are any other questions, we do not need a motion on this, so thank you for your
All right, thank you.
presentation tonight. And with that, our committee of the whole meeting is adjourned.
All right, if anybody wants to take a quick break,
we'll get our council meeting started shortly.